Upon this rock I will build my church. This declaration is often interpreted as Jesus saying that Peter is the rock upon which the church is built. Those who interpret it this way believe that Peter was the chief apostle and that later he became the first pope. Let's look at this declaration for a moment. Notice the first part of Jesus' statement in Matthew 16:18. And I also say to you that you are Peter. The Greek word for Petros, from which we get the English word Peter, is a masculine proper noun which always means a stone. This word was used to speak about a movable stone. It can refer to a stone small enough to be put on a slingshot or to a stone large enough to be put as a boundary marker. On the other hand, when Jesus says, "And upon this rock I will build my church," he is using a different word for rock. This word is Petra, which is a feminine noun and means a solid mass of virgin rock, like the cliffs along the seacoast. This rock, as opposed to Petros, is an immovable bedrock, like the one used by the wise men to build his house upon, like the one from which a first-century tomb can be cut out, or like the one from which streams of water can flow out in the middle of the wilderness to quench the thirst of God's people. This is the type of rock upon which Jesus said he was going to build his church, as opposed to a movable stone. So, is Peter the rock upon which the church is built, or is Jesus talking about someone else? Let's answer this question. To find out who is the rock upon which the church is built, let's look closely at the topic of conversation of this section of Scripture. At this point in his ministry, we see Jesus addressing the fact that although common opinion had a good general concept of him, they did not believe that he was the Messiah. In addition to this, the antagonism against Jesus from his enemies was growing to the point that Jesus felt it was time to let his disciples know that it would be necessary for him to suffer at the hands of his enemies. For this reason, this whole conversation centers around his true identity. Knowing who Jesus really was would help them understand his death, burial, and resurrection. Notice the first questions about his identity. What were the first two questions that Jesus made his disciples about? They were about the identity of Jesus. Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? Matthew 16:13. And who do you say that I am? Matthew 16:15. Next, notice the confession of his identity. What was it that Peter confessed? Peter confessed the identity of Jesus. He answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Matthew 16:16. Then we have the revelation of his identity. What did the Father reveal to Peter that men failed to reveal? The identity of Jesus. He said, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." Matthew 16:17. The this that the Father revealed to Peter is the identity of Jesus. Jesus is pleased because Peter has come to a better and accurate understanding of who Jesus was. He had been paying attention to all of the evidence that had been laid out before him. This conversation concludes with the command about his identity. What was it that the disciples were forbidden from telling others? The identity of Jesus. Then he commanded his disciples that they should tell no one that he was the Christ. Matthew 16:20. The crowds were not ready for this information yet. They still had misconceptions about the Messiah, so the revelation of his identity needed to wait a little longer. Lastly, we can see the cost of his identity. What was the point of contention between Jesus and the Jewish leaders? the identity of Jesus. From that time, Jesus began to show to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and the chief priests and scribes, and be killed and be raised the third day. Matthew 16:21. What can explain the fact that he was killed and raised up on the third day? The fact that he was the prophesied Messiah, the Son of the living God. As we can see, this conversation is not centered around Peter, but around Jesus and his identity, in the face of public opinion and impending persecution. We will be going against common sense to think that Peter is the center of this conversation. The rock upon which the church will be built is found in Peter's confession. In his confession, one can see the fact that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. He is the Petra, or bedrock, upon which he promised to build his church. It is Christ who was called the chief cornerstone in Matthew 21:42 and other passages, and also the spiritual rock that followed his people in the wilderness, 1 Corinthians 10:4. Paul also said that no one can lay a foundation other than the one that has been laid, which is Jesus Christ, 1 Corinthians 3:11. As Christians, we are living stones built into the structure, and the apostles have places of honor, but it is Christ who is the living stone in whom the church is founded, 1 Peter 2:3 and 4. Peter was to have a glorious part in the establishment of the church. He was to proclaim to the Jews and the Gentiles for the first time the conditions of entrance into the kingdom. But he is not the rock upon which the church is built.